Someone in your group just died. Maybe it was fast, maybe it wasn't. But it's morning now, and the body is still here, lying a few feet from where you sleep. And here's the part nobody warns you about. The body is already becoming a problem. By tonight, the smell will start. By tomorrow, it will carry on the wind. And out here, a smell like that is a dinner bell. It calls in the hyenas, the big cats, everything with a nose and an appetite, straight toward the place where your children are sleeping. So you have a choice to make, and you have hours to make it. Not a ceremony, a choice. Do you leave, walk away, abandon the camp, and let the dead keep it? Or do you do something with the body, move it, hide it, get it away from the living before the dark comes? This exact decision, standing over someone you knew, is one your ancestors faced over and over for hundreds of thousands of years. And how they answered it is the strangest, most revealing story our species ever left behind. But before we get into what ancient humans did with the body, think about this. Right now, if someone you loved died, you already know exactly what would happen next. There would be a phone call. Someone would come and take the body away, gently, in a vehicle made for exactly that purpose. There would be a room with soft lighting, flowers, people in dark clothes standing quietly, saying things like, "She looked peaceful." And at the end of it, the body would be lowered into the ground, or turned to ash, marked with a stone, given a place. You don't think of any of this as strange. It's just what you do when a person dies. You care for the body. You say goodbye. But stop and think about what that actually is for a second. A human being has died. The person is gone. Every other animal on Earth solves this problem in exactly one way. They walk away. A herd moves on and leaves the dead where they fell. A wolf pack doesn't hold a funeral. Grief, if it exists at all in the animal world, lasts minutes, maybe hours, and then life continues and the body is left to the rot and the ravens. So here's the question almost nobody asks. For almost every human who ever lived, with no morgue, no coffin, no cemetery, no priest, and no soft lighting, what did they actually do with the bodies? Because the body doesn't just disappear. Someone had to decide. And the decisions they made, going back hundreds of thousands of years, turn out to be one of the strangest and most revealing stories our species has ever left behind. Because somewhere in that story is the exact moment we stopped being animals that walk away and became something else. Something that couldn't. Let's start at the bottom, with the coldest, most practical truth, because it's the one people least want to hear. For a very long time, a dead body was not a person to be honored. It was meat and material, and we know this because we can see the knife marks. Deep in a cave system called Goyet, in what is now Belgium, archaeologists found a collection of Neanderthal bones dating to somewhere between 40,000 and 45,000 years ago. And when they looked closely, the bones told a grim story. There were cut marks on them, in exactly the places you'd expect if someone were stripping the flesh away. There were fractures. The long bones cracked open the way you'd crack a bone to get at the marrow inside. Some of the bones had even been used afterward as tools to shape and sharpen pieces of stone. These weren't burials. These Neanderthals had been butchered, processed the same way, in the same cave, as the reindeer and horses whose bones lay scattered right alongside them. Here's something most people don't realize. This wasn't a one-off. Signs of cannibalism show up at Neanderthal sites across Europe, and it's a real, documented part of how some ancient humans dealt with the dead. Sometimes it was survival, starvation, the terrible arithmetic of a body that was still, in the end, calories. And a recent study of those Goyet bones found something even darker. The victims were mostly women and children, and they may not even have been locals. They appear to have been brought there, from somewhere else, which points away from a respectful funeral rite and towards something closer to violence between groups. It's an uncomfortable place to begin, but it's the honest floor of this story. For some ancient humans, the answer to, "What did you do with the body?" was, "You used it, and you moved on." That is how close to the animal world we started. But even here at the very bottom, something is already flickering that doesn't fit. Because if a body is just meat, you leave it where it falls. You don't carry it deep into a cave. And that brings us to the second thing humans did, and the first real crack in the animal explanation. Here's the thing about a decaying body in the place where you live. You cannot stay near it. The smell alone is unbearable. But the real danger is what the smell brings. A rotting corpse is a beacon. It calls in hyenas, big cats, anything with a nose and an appetite, straight to the mouth of the shelter where your children are sleeping. So the very first practical problem the dead create is simple and urgent. You have to get the body away from the living. And at one astonishing sight, we can see people solving that problem an almost unimaginable amount of time ago. In the mountains of northern Spain, in a place called Atapuerca, there is a cave shaft that archaeologists have named the Cima de los Huesos. In English, the pit of bones, and the name is not an exaggeration. At the bottom of a vertical shaft, more than 40 feet straight down, researchers have recovered the remains of at least 28 individuals, thousands upon thousands of bone fragments. And here is the part that stops you cold. These bones are around 430,000 years old. Now, for a long time, you might assume they simply fell. But the evidence argues against it. The bodies show no signs of having been broken apart before they were deposited. There are almost no animal bones down there mixed in with them, which is bizarre if it were a natural death trap that random creatures kept tumbling into. It's overwhelmingly humans, and overwhelmingly teenagers and young adults. The most likely explanation, the one many of the researchers who've spent their lives on that site now favor, is that these bodies were deliberately dropped down that shaft. On purpose, by other people. Think about what that means. Almost 500,000 years ago, someone stood at the top of that shaft, holding the body of someone they knew, and let them go into the dark. We don't know if it was reverence. We don't know if it was fear or disease control or something we don't have a word for, but it was a decision. It was the dead being deliberately removed from the world of the living and given a place, even if that place was just the bottom of a pit. This may be the oldest evidence anywhere on Earth of humans treating their dead as something that had to be dealt with, rather than something to walk away from. And that flicker, once it starts, only gets stranger. Because the next site takes everything you think you know about who was capable of this, and breaks it. Here's something that genuinely divides scientists to this day. In South Africa, there's a cave system called Rising Star. To reach the deepest chambers, you have to squeeze through gaps in the rock so narrow that the researchers who excavated it had to be selected for their small size just to fit. It is dark, difficult, dangerous ground. And down in that blackness, they found the bones of a species called Homo naledi. Homo naledi is strange for a lot of reasons, but here's the one that matters. Its brain was tiny, about a third the size of yours. This was not, by any measure we usually use, a big-brained genius of a creature. And yet the team that excavated Rising Star, led by the paleoanthropologist Lee Berger, made an extraordinary claim in 2023. They argued that Homo naledi had carried its dead deliberately deep into that cave system and buried them in shallow graves in the earth, roughly 250,000 years ago, which would make it the oldest deliberate burial ever found. Older than anything by our own species by a wide margin, done by a creature with a brain smaller than a chimpanzee's. Now, I have to be honest with you here, because this is exactly where a lot of channels would just tell you the exciting version and move on. The claim is fiercely disputed. When Berger's team published it, other scientists pushed back hard. They pointed out that bodies can end up in caves for all sorts of reasons that aren't burial, water washing them in, natural traps, gradual accumulation over time. They argued the evidence for actual dug graves wasn't solid enough, that the soil didn't clearly show the disturbance you'd expect from digging. The peer reviewers, when the papers were assessed, were not convinced the case had been made. So the truth is, we don't know. We may never know for certain. But sit with what's even being argued about here. The question on the table is whether a small-brained cousin of ours, deep in the African past, felt something toward its dead strong enough to carry them into the dark and cover them over. And the fact that serious scientists are fighting about it rather than laughing it off tells you how blurry the line really is between an animal that walks away and a creature that buries. Whatever caring for the dead is, it may be far older and far less exclusive to us than we ever assumed. Which brings us to the moment the flicker becomes a flame. Because up to now, everything has been ambiguous. Disposal, removal, maybe burial. But at the next site, we see something you cannot explain away as anything but feeling. In a cave called Shanidar in the mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a group of Neanderthals, and two things about that place changed how the world thought about them forever. The first is a single skeleton, a Neanderthal man archaeologists studied in extraordinary detail, and his body was a record of suffering. He had a withered arm that may have been useless or amputated. He'd suffered a crushing blow to the side of his head that likely left him blind in one eye. He had injuries to his legs that would have made walking difficult and painful. And here's the thing. These injuries had healed. He lived for years, maybe decades, with a body that could not have survived alone in that harsh world. which means inescapably that other people fed him, protected him, carried him along. Someone cared for a man who could no longer care for himself in the depths of the last ice age. Compassion, written in healed bone. And the second thing is the one you may have heard of. When they excavated one of the shanidar bodies, they found unusual clumps of ancient pollen in the soil around it. And the original archaeologist proposed something beautiful, that this Neanderthal had been laid to rest on a bed of wildflowers, buried with blossoms. The idea, the famous flower burial, swept around the world because it suggested Neanderthals grieved, decorated their dead, felt loss the way we do. But here, again, I owe you the honest version. Because in recent years, other scientists went back and questioned the flowers. They found pollen elsewhere in the cave, on surfaces where no burial had happened. And they proposed a much less romantic source. Bees. Ground-nesting bees that burrow into cave sediment and leave clumps of pollen behind, completely by accident. The wildflowers on the grave may never have existed. They may have been an accident of insect biology that we turned into a story because we wanted it to be true. And yet, here's what the flower debate misses, and what still stands after the flowers fall away. Those bodies at Shanidar were clustered together. The living man who survived his terrible injuries proves beyond argument that these people cared for each other in life. Whether or not anyone laid a single flower, the Neanderthals of Shanidar tended their weak and gathered their dead. The bouquet might be a myth. The tenderness underneath it is not. So we've climbed all the way from butchered bones in a Belgian cave to a wounded man kept alive by people who wouldn't let him die. And now we reach the top of the ladder. The moment the answer to what did they do with the bodies becomes something you would recognize instantly across 78,000 years as unmistakably, achingly human. On the coast of Kenya, at a cave called Panga ya Saidi, archaeologists were digging when they found a shallow pit, and curled inside it were the fragile, partial remains of a small child. A little boy or girl, about 3 years old. The researchers named the child Mtoto, which simply means child in Swahili. And the way Mtoto was found tells you everything. The little body had not been dropped or discarded or left. It had been placed, laid carefully on its right side, with the knees drawn up toward the chest, curled into a position that looks unmistakably like sleep. The head appears to have been resting on something, some kind of support or pillow made of a material that has long since rotted away, and the body seems to have been wrapped, bound in a shroud of something perishable, before being lowered into a deliberately dug grave and covered with earth. Then, soon after death, before the body had even begun to fall apart, it was buried, gently, in the sheltered mouth of the cave, 78,000 years ago, the oldest known human burial in all of Africa. Now hold that image in your mind. A 3-year-old child, dead, and instead of walking away, the people who loved that child dug into the earth, arranged the little body as if putting it down for the night, cushioned its head, wrapped it, and laid it to rest. That is not disposal. That is not disease control. You do not cushion the head of a body you're only trying to get rid of. That is grief. That is a mother or a father or a whole community that could not bear to simply leave. And so they did the one thing they could still do for a child they could no longer save. They made the body comfortable. They said goodbye. And this is the twist that reframes the entire story. Because we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. We keep asking what ancient humans did with the bodies, as if it were a practical problem to be solved. But burial was never practical. It never made survival sense. It costs time and energy and risk to dig a grave for someone who is already gone and can never repay it. From a cold evolutionary standpoint, it is a waste. Every other animal is right to walk away. We are the animal that couldn't. And that inability, that refusal to let the dead just be gone, is not a small thing. It might be one of the very first signs of everything we now call being human. To bury someone is to say that a person is more than a body, that a relationship doesn't end just because a heartbeat did, that the dead still belong to us, and we to them. Somewhere between the butchered bones of Goyet and the cushioned head of a child at Pangaya Sidi, our ancestors crossed a line no creature had ever crossed before. They started to mourn. And mourning is just love with nowhere left to go. So the next time you find yourself in that room with the soft lighting and the flowers and the name read out loud, and it all feels so ordinary, so automatic, so obviously what a person does, remember how staggeringly strange it actually is. Remember that no other animal on this planet does it. Remember that it took hundreds of thousands of years and an unbroken chain of grieving hands to build the simple human certainty that when someone you love dies, you do not walk away. You stay. You dig, you lay them down gently, and you cover them, and you mark the place. Your ancestors figured out how to do that in the mouth of a cave 78,000 years ago for a 3-year-old whose name we will never know. And every funeral that has ever been held since is just us, still doing it, still refusing, after all this time, to be the animal that walks away.